want to take this time to thank everybody for their support of myself, Mark, and the music and mental health movement. Please take this time to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get notified of when I drop some more great content. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to my channel, Music and Mental Health. This is not my first channel, but it is my first channel in this era of YouTube that has gotten monetized. Late Night Live. Good evening, Ed. Good evening, Cass. So this is just to speak a little bit about the peer specialist position and how it has transformed into case management. So when I first became a peer specialist, I guess, as a volunteer about 11 years ago. I first became a paid peer specialist about 9 years ago. So the peer specialist position, as I've spoken about before, I didn't know what that was when somebody first suggested for me to become a peer specialist. A peer specialist is basically somebody who has behavioral health issues or substance abuse issues, or both in some cases, and they use their lived experience to assist others to get through similar times. They now have certifications for it. At one time, it was just your lived experience was your only qualification that you needed. But then they started to create peer specialist certifications across the US. I don't really know about other countries, how they do it there, but I know that in the US, it's different certifications for different states. People right now are trying to create a legislation for a peer specialist certification that goes across all states. And quite frankly, I don't really understand why there's not one, because being a peer specialist is not like being a doctor, being an RN, or being, I don't know, an accountant. I don't know. But my point of that is being a peer specialist is being a peer specialist. I guess there's probably some things that you need to know state by state, like certain laws and legislature. But at the same time, I could take my peer specialist certification and what I know as a peer and go over to Australia, and I feel like I would still be able to be a successful peer without getting an Australian peer specialist certification. But anyways, I've spoken about what a peer specialist is at its core and what a peer specialist is supposed to be. And that's what the job was when I started doing the job. I really enjoyed it. Late show sponsored by Unisum. I really enjoyed doing the job when I first started it because that's all I was doing. I started out leading peer support groups, and essentially all I did in those groups was I would bring in topics. The first group that I ever led was called Peer Recovery. And when I first started doing the group, I felt like I had to be someone who brings in all these amazing topics and teach people different things. And so that's what I started out doing. I would research some articles, I would print them out, I would figure out things that foster discussion amongst the group. But then I found that those groups would be getting derailed because people would say, Mark, there's this thing going on with my family that I want to talk about, or there's this thing that's going on. Um, I want to talk about what's happening in my therapy sessions, or I want to talk about what's happening with my psychiatrist, or I'm having this problem with my friend. And I used to get so frustrated with that because I was like, man, I prepare all this stuff for this topic. And then the group just starts going off about their lives. And then at a certain point, I sat down and said to myself, matter of fact, I didn't just sit down and say to myself, I created a feedback survey and I passed it out to the group and I asked different questions on the survey. And the group actually said that they prefer when I just let them speak on what's happening in their life. So what I started to do was I would bring the topic, but before I start speaking, I would ask the group if there's anything that they would like to speak about. And somebody usually had something to say, and the group would give their different opinions, and I would give my opinion. And everybody, a lot of people there said that it was their favorite group. And basically, what happened with that was, yeah, that's what happened with the group. So the next thing that I did was I got, I guess you could call it a transfer slash promotion into a peer specialist position that was in the office, where I actually had my own office. I was seeing people in the office. They would come there. They would talk to me about whatever problems or challenges that they had in their life. And I would just give my suggestions based on my personal experiences, my opinion, and my um, title, I guess, my professional background as a peer specialist, the training that I did to receive my certification is what I'm trying to say. A combination of all those things, lived experience, the peer training, and my work experiences to give them different advice on what was happening in their life. And essentially, that was being a peer specialist, and I was great at that. And they never told me that I was great at that. I mean, as in my management and leadership never told me I was great at that. But several of my clients did. And I really, in retrospect, at least, I really enjoy that because at one time, I used to take the leadership's opinions and hold them in a higher regard than the actual clients that were seeing me. But nowadays, I don't do that. So from there, I transferred out of that job and I got into a job with um, an insurance company. I'm not going to list the insurance company. Some people know, some people who watch this who know me off of YouTube know which insurance company I'm talking about. But I worked for an insurance company and it's a new thing. It's a relatively new thing for insurance companies to hire peer specialists directly. It depends. Sometimes it's mandated and sometimes it's not. At my current job, it's not mandated, but at my last, not my last job, but the one that I was talking about where I saw them in the office, at times I did see mandated clients. I saw people who were, they had prison sentences and they were on probation. And I saw some people who were there because they got DUIs and they had to get a certain amount of counsel to be able to get their license back. I saw people that was in there for uh, ACS cases where they were trying to get their children back and they required a certain amount of counseling to do that. So yeah, I did see people who were mandated at that time, but now I don't see anybody who's mandated. But anyways, from that job, I went to this job with the insurance company, and I was saying the insurance companies hiring peer specialists is a pretty new thing. And it's part of this thing that they started doing. I don't know exactly what year that it started, but I think probably around 2019, 2020, maybe earlier, but it became really popular that particular year, especially when the pandemic was at its beginning. So what was happening was there's this government funding where the government funds these organizations, both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. And they say, we want to prevent people with mental illnesses and or substance abuse problems from going to the hospital because it is very costly when somebody has some kind of an overdose and goes in and they have to get detoxed. I have now seen the enormous costs of those bills. When I was working for the insurance company, I could see all the claims for each person and all their bills, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. The cost of a hospital bed for one night is a lot, let alone having to keep somebody for like 7 nights, let's say, and detox. Enormous. And then the cost of putting them in the psych ward, because that's often what would happen. They would have them detox in the ER, and then from the ER, from the ER, they would go inpatient for the detox, and then right from the detox, they would be transferred right into the hospital, and they would stay in the hospital for anywhere from a few days to like a couple of months, and those costs were enormous. So what this funding did for these companies, it's crazy to me how Mark was really going to hide this slide from us. So what they did with these companies was they gave them funding and said, we are going to give you funding to hire a whole staff that includes psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, nurse practitioners, case managers, peer specialists, medical doctors. So in some cases, those people actually reach out and kind of provide, I want to call it consultation services, where it's not quite the same thing as getting a session or going into a doctor's office or talking to or having like a talk therapy session, but they will have those specialists reach out to them and provide them with support, basically, to hopefully get them connected to things in their community that will prevent them from being hospitalized, because a lot of people don't have support systems. So in theory, this sounds amazing and wonderful in theory, because you take somebody who is isolated, who might not have family support, who might not have friends around them, and now you get somebody making these calls on a regular basis. You have the nurse who's calling to check and ask them about their blood pressure and their eating habits, and they're asking them about their self-care habits. And then you have the doctor who's asking them when they last had an annual physical, or asking them about their gaps in care. Gaps in care is basically certain things that each person needs each year, certain things they need to check each year to ensure optimal health. You have your peer specialist who calls them and, talks to them about how their life is going and provides support. In theory is what I'm saying. So I remember when I was at my last job, at that insurance company. I remember it was the first time I think I was ever at a job that had an annual review. I don't know why, but I never had an annual review at any of my other jobs. Um, I know that some of the earlier jobs that I did, like retail and fast food and those kind of things, obviously you're not going to have an annual review. But I didn't have an annual review at any of my professional jobs either until this one. So we got to the annual review, and I'm thinking to myself, I know that I wasn't perfect in terms of inputting all my notes on time, and I know that I wasn't perfect in terms of making all my calls within the time frame that we're supposed to make the calls, because it was a very regimented job, and it was more about the paperwork and the paper trail than it was actually about how much assistance that you were giving to these people in need. And I was good at giving them the assistance, but I wasn't great at the paper trail part of it. So I got into this meeting with my manager where they do the review. And I'll never forget that the manager actually told me, they were like, "You know, Mark, I've looked through several of your notes, and the only thing that I'm seeing as service provided is peer support." And I'm confused at that point because I said as a response, I'm a peer support specialist. So I don't really know why you're saying the only thing that you're seeing is peer support. So then that person told me, well, I mean, you are technically doing the job that you're supposed to do, but you're doing the bare minimum here because you're also supposed to be connecting them with their providers, making sure they're seeing their psychiatrist, scheduling their transportation, asking them if they need assistance with their health, their what's it called, housing applications, um, going to meet them at the Department of Social Services to assist them with getting their SNAP benefits. And I'm like, everything that you're describing is case management. And the manager was like, that's one way to look at it, but these are all requirements of your job. And I felt so upset when I was told that as a peer support specialist, that I was providing the bare minimum as a providing them peer support. I'm like, that's why you hire case managers and peer specialists. It's two separate positions. But now, if you go online right now and look at 90% of the peer support specialist positions in existence, and you look at the job responsibilities and the job description, they will all have case management duties in the description, and they will all say must be competent with case management abilities. And the reason why they do this, well, it's a money thing. So there's a lot more peer specialist jobs than there used to be. The pay has gone up. It's more than it used to be. But they're like, there's different types of case managers. There's nurse case managers that have RNs as a qualification. There is case managers that are required to have a master's degree, usually like a master's of social work, or sometimes a master's in psychology. There's exceptions to that, but there's case managers that are required to have a master's degree. There's case managers like in my position that are only required to have a bachelor's degree. And then there's peer specialists, but they have the peer specialists do the same thing as all those other types of case managers. The only difference is the pay structure. So they've taken the position from what it was and said, okay, we're going to make this certification. And the reason they told us that they made the certification was so that we would be distinguished as qualified professionals, because the peer specialist position was always looked down upon in the medical field, because they're like, I had to go through all these studies to become a doctor. I had to go through all these different studies to become a psychiatrist. I had to do um, all this different schoolwork and internship work to earn this title. And the only thing that you did was live through some stuff. And that's the only thing that qualifies you. So, in theory, creating the peer specialist certification makes a lot of sense because it gave us curriculum that you actually had to study. And then a lot of them, like I said, they're starting to at least require degrees. That's not the majority of peer specialist positions, but I think eventually it's going to start trending in that direction. Um, because there are certain skills that you need to be able to do the job. But I just don't like the way that they have changed the job into basically case manager. And for the people who wonder why I would make a switch from case manager to peer specialist, is because I was already doing case management as a peer specialist. So I got to a point of frustration where I said to myself, if you're going to be like, you're a peer specialist, but you have to do all these case management duties, why don't I just become a case manager and just do the case management duties by themselves? So that's basically my version of how the peer specialist position has changed over time. Most companies that will hire you as a peer specialist require you to do everything that a case manager does. And that's part of the reason why I still work towards and now have my own clients that I see outside of my job. There's only a few of them so far, but I like having those people to speak to every week because they remind me of the essence of why I started in the field in the first place. In my mom's day, you got at least a week. I'm probably missing something. Hi there, Jewel. Hi, Trisha. It might be because insurance only gives you so much days in the hospital. What is this about? Oh, there it is. I found it. That's why they stopped letting women who just gave birth a week to recover in hospital, which most women appreciate before it begins. Yeah, and a lot of companies also do not really give that much time after you give birth either. I mean, now in New York, you can use something that's called paid family leave, and you can get like 12 weeks. But I think from what one of my former colleagues had told me, you can't use that in conjunction with what's it called? Maternity leave. Like you have to pick one or the other. Be self-employed and give better service. Yeah, I mean that's ultimately the goal for me. I guess you could say I'm self-employed part-time because I do have now some consistent clients that I see, and I almost feel like I make a bigger impact on their lives. But as a case manager, you do so many things for each person. So I am impacting the people's lives that I am assisting at work, and I'm impacting their lives in a big way. I definitely am. but it's just not in the particular way that I would like to impact them. You know, I respect people who have told me that they've been in the case management world 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I keep saying this. I have 1 year in me, and that's if I make it to a year. I have 1 year. I'm 4 months in. There's no way that I could see myself doing this position beyond 1 year because it's too much. I feel it feels like being somebody's parent, except a very involved parent, not even a parent that just kind of is like, you know what? I'm going to help you as much as I can, but you're grown now, so I'm teaching you to be self-sufficient. In theory, you are trying to teach them to be self-sufficient, but with the population, it doesn't really work that way. Anyways, thanks for joining me. I'm hopping off. And please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get notified of when I drop some more great content. Thank y'all for joining.